So first off, great. I love this room. It's super good.
Yep.
This is the library.
Yeah,
This is
it's a nice quiet space.
yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Well, either way, I am joined today by Stephen Mortimer, who is a senior game designer at Riot Games. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So, talk to me a little bit. What exactly is it that you do at Riot? Because people hear designer and they probably think champion designer, right?
Yeah, so pretty much anything outside of the game, I try to get involved in and help make better. So this could be things like the leveling, the missions, the events, all the way to various parts of loot, things like that, and just trying to be familiar with everything on League and how can we make it better.
So it's like sort of the experience outside of the matches themselves.
Yeah, I mean we've got a really good team that's handling the core game, but anything outside the core game, that's where I get to help step in and try to make that experience better.
Can you give me an example maybe of like a direct thing that people would be familiar with that you've
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things I'm proud of was the level cap. When I first got to Riot, it was sort of like, cool, we want to add some stuff for players to earn and feel good. And it was like, man, as a player, I've been stuck at level 30 for 7 years. I'd kind of like to fix that. And what was cool about being at Riot was they were like, okay, sounds great, go for it. And so, went through all the work, and now players can level up. I personally just hit level 100 yesterday, so yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the achievement.
Well, thank you.
Uh,
Despite losing 4 games.
So what's interesting to me about that is that it doesn't sound like there was a sort of like directive that was handed down from on high, like we need to change the level cap. This is something where you're able to kind of just identify something that you would like to see different and pitch it, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the big things I like about Riot is that if you've got a sort of a goal that helps support another goal, in this case it was runes, we were launching Runes Reforged, and they were like, oh, we really need to balance the economy, and now might be a good time to address that. Anyone have any cool thoughts? That was where you could swoop in and kind of go like, well, wouldn't it be great if we allowed players who might be losing some games or just stuck in the same spot in ranked, but still make progress another way and show off like how much they've been playing? And so that was sort of a cool solution that everyone was like, yeah, that sounds great. Tired of being level 30.
So how long have you been at Riot?
Almost 2 years now.
All right. And where were you before?
Before that, I was at Nintendo for 11 years.
11 years.
11 years, yeah.
Okay. Were you a designer the whole time you were there?
I was. I started off as an intern making $10 an hour, making levels for a DS title, and then worked my way all the way up to where the last 2 titles, I was actually the director of the team. I got to be the first name in the credits. That's
Nice.
One of those cool moments.
And they don't even have credits here, unfortunately.
It's true. It's true. I just get to tweet out that I shipped something, and that's about it.
Yeah,
So,
into the Twitter void, and
That's
hopefully
right.
people
you
recognize.
get 1 or 2 likes.
Yeah.
Hopefully one of them's not your mom.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So 11 years. So how did you? Because you started off as an intern. So did you? It's interesting because a lot of people I think like the idea of like becoming a game designer, but don't really know what that path is like. Like, did you go to college for game design? Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, so I was one of those standard kids that like always wanted to be a game designer, played games since I was 5, stuff like that. I actually went to University of Washington for a year and was like, this isn't going to get me there. So dropped out and then applied to DigiPen, which is a gaming school. But at the time, they didn't have a video game design degree. It was only engineering and art. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to be an engineer, but this is my way in, so I'm just going to stomach through it. And honestly, I wasn't that great a student, but a lot of other students helped me through it and got through. And my sophomore year, Nintendo had a job opening for this internship, but it was for juniors and seniors only. And I'm like, no, you've got to let me try this. And so I actually went into the administration office and was like, please, I'm begging you, you've got to let me try. They're like, all right, you can try. I'm not going to promise anything. Went through the interview process, became one of the final 5. They had a level design test, nailed that, and then got the job. And so my junior and senior year, I was working at Nintendo.
What was working at Nintendo like?
Not what you would expect. It's interesting because I said I went to DigiPen and they teach you various things about how to make games, how to create like game design documents. And within like the first 2 days at Nintendo, it's like, yeah, none of that. This is how we do things.
That's but that feels like how college is for everyone, right?
Yes.
Like, anytime you study something, like you end up experiencing like a completely different world.
Yep.
Whenever you.
Yeah, the big one that caught me off guard at first was like, DigiPen was teaching you all about like making a game design document and making sure everything is planned out before you get started. And then you show up at Nintendo and they're like, no, we just try to like make something fun, and once we have that, then we start building around that. And until we have something fun, a big document's not how you find fun.
Yeah.
And it was just like, whoa, mind-blowing.
So 11 years. So like what are some of the projects that you can talk about that you worked on there?
Yeah, so I shipped 8 titles while I was there. 6 of them are from the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, which is basically a puzzle game where you play these little toy Mario characters and try to get them to the goal. So a lot of puzzle games. There was a small game called Aura Aura Climber that very few people have ever heard of, and then a crosswords game where I learned more about crossword puzzles than I ever wanted to know.
After being there for over a decade, I imagine it was probably a difficult decision to decide, you were going to move, especially because Nintendo up in Washington, down here, you've got Riot in LA. So what was kind of that experience like for you?
It was challenging for sure. Call me old-fashioned, but I'm definitely like, you go to one company and you work hard and stay there a long time. I definitely had been attached to the company. But as I said, I got to be the director of sort of the last 2 titles. And it was sort of looking like, okay, well, the next project, you'll be the director of another puzzle game and another puzzle game. Because Nintendo can oftentimes play it safe like that and sort of like, cool, you're really good at that, keep doing it. But for me as a designer, I needed to kind of prove I could get better at other things and try other projects, other type of games. And so it was sort of a hard decision. I actually only applied to one other company, which was Riot. Otherwise, I probably would have just stayed at Nintendo. But yeah, Riot accepted, and so decided to make that leap. And admittedly, it was like I was sort of lacking confidence at the time because it's like, can I really do something else? And by coming here, and I think I've been doing pretty well so far, so trying to prove that, yeah, I can do other things.
Okay, I'm sure you had in your mind this vision of Riot whenever you applied and whenever you accepted. Now you've been here for 2 years, and I'm kind of curious, like, how does the past 2 years like compare to sort of the impressions that you had, especially given that your background was somewhat limited to one company, right?
Yep.
That was the only perspective you had.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, when people first come to Riot and other companies as well, you kind of have this imposter syndrome where it's like, man, everyone else around here is like so much smarter than I am. One of the silliest things I struggled with for a long time was like, a lot of our designers here will talk a lot and use big words. And I came from a Japanese company where you have to often speak through translation. And so you have to use very short, simple words. And so I was just like trying to keep up with these conversations, and it was intimidating. So yeah, like I said, imposter syndrome kicks in. You're like, am I actually even good enough to be here? Over time, I've sort of found that, no, actually, you are pretty good at your job. And so you've been able to sort of expand on what you can do. And admittedly, I'm pretty surprised how much I've been able to do here. I was expecting to have to sort of work my way up a little bit more before I'd get to do anything cool. And instead, I've got to do a lot of cool things in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, was it hard switching from an environment that was like much more structured and, as you said, maybe top down, to something where it's just like it is still a little crazy to me that you were able to sort of say like, well, League of Legends had a level cap for its whole existence. Everybody talks about hitting level 30, and let's just throw that out. And it sounds like you got buy-in pretty quickly. Yeah,
surprisingly so, I'd say. It was definitely an adjustment. I just sort of went in with a strategy of treating everyone like I would almost at Nintendo, where it's like, okay, assume anyone might be my superior, talk to them very humble, like, what about this idea, versus sort of the boastful, like, my idea is great, you've got to listen to it. And that strategy has tended to work well. People are much more willing to listen when you're like, oh, here's a cool idea, and if you reject it, no biggie. Yeah. Try another idea, come up with other stuff.
Have you had any big setbacks while you were here?
Nothing too crazy. Probably the most interesting setback, with releasing the level cap, I learned that change of version should not be underestimated. And what I mean by that is players were so used to IP and the way things used to be that we released this new system that is better, and mathematically we proved many times that like we're giving you more free stuff. Players were still just like, this is terrible, this is awful. And that first like week of player reaction was like scary. It was like, oh my God, they don't love it. I was in rooms for 10 hours a day, just like really beating up, like, what do we do about this? How do we make this better? And we made a couple minor adjustments. And over time, we sort of ended up being right, where it's like now whenever someone's like, oh, this new system's unfair, many players speak up and they're like, no, it's not. It's been proven. it's great, shut up.
Yeah.
Which is gratifying, but at the time it was like scary because, mine and many other writers' goals is to just like make really cool stuff that players like, and when they don't, it's like, oh crap.
Yeah, I was gonna say because it must be really hard. Like I've worked on projects before where I'm like so proud of it, right? Like it means so much. I've spent so much time on it, and then I might release it, and the community feedback is rough, right? It's kind of a weird gig where the feedback is so instantaneous, and because it's somewhat anonymous, like a lot of people, like you probably release this thing, you're excited to release it, it's shipped, like it accounts for so much of your work, and then you go online and people are like, this thing sucks, Riot's cheap, they're trying to like make us pay more, why are they ripping us off?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch to that too, right? Because like oftentimes some of the complaints are like a lack of understanding, or like maybe we didn't publish it right, like why does this work the way it does? In Leveling's case, a lot of people were focused on like, level 150 to 175 is really, really slow. And it's like, well, yeah, but most of you aren't going to hit that ever in your entire life. And even then, we fixed it after the fact. But then there's just the personal side of it where like we're on Twitter, Reddit, boards, you name it. And it's like every single comment, you almost have to learn as a developer not to take those personally and not to like over scrutinize on each one. And instead look at them of high level of just like, okay, players overall seem to be okay. There's a few people that aren't. How can I make it better from that point on? But it can definitely defeat a person to see a lot of that. And it's a skill you have to build up.
Yeah. Have you had those days where, because you mentioned you have a long commute, I imagine you come here, you work like long hours on something that releases, and then you go online and you see people just say it sucks. Like that must be a tough ride home.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully I've been blessed that most of the stuff I've released hasn't been too bad. Probably the most infamous thing I've done was there was a mission in the Worlds event last year, and the mission was you had to win a game with Infinity Edge, win a game with Randuin's Omen, and win a game with Morellonomicon. Basically, the goal of the mission was like play 3 different types of champions.
Right.
What ended up happening was players would like buy all 3 in one game and ruin the game, or they would right before they were about to win, tower dive, kill themselves, and try to buy them all in the shop. And you would get games where all 5 players did that, and then they'd lose the game because they did that.
Yeah.
And you're just going, oh my God.
But that's like a mistake on your end, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely. That was totally my bad.
Unlike the other situation where you say, like, well, we know this is better, but like it just hasn't been communicated.
This was just like a my bad.
Yeah.
And thankfully I handled it as best I could, which is like I read on boards and Reddit and was like, yep, this is a terrible mission. We'll never do this again. Made sure that, we took that learning to heart. And it's a small thing. It's just like a single mission, but like even a small thing like that, like you take super personally. It's like, how can I get better? How can I make sure that never happens again?
Do you play a lot of League of Legends?
I did hit level 100.
Okay, that's true. That's true. That is significant.
Yes.
Do you play games outside of League?
Yeah, quite a bit. Admittedly, less so right now because I'm working way too much.
Okay.
But
On what?
Something players will hopefully really, really like very soon.
Maybe after the first couple of days of being very frustrated.
This time, I'm hoping they'll just love it. It's a doozy. It'll be good. We'll see. It's eating a lot of my time though.
But you will do, because I know some people who are just like, they get so into one game, and I can imagine working in it like Riot where you're like the focus is so much on this one game, at least publicly, like I could see it just sort of consuming, but it sounds like you play other titles as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as a designer, you really need to understand a lot of the other games out there, and it's not just like what's fun and what's not, but it's also so you don't end up reinventing the wheel. If you need to come up with a new UI scheme for a various menu, it's like knowing that there's 500,000 different menus out there, you can sort of pull on that knowledge and go like, oh, well, there was this one that worked really well. We can do something similar to that. Because again, like so many games over the last 30 years, a lot of problems have been solved. And that was something actually we learned at Nintendo, because one of their big things was like, you come up with a core concept for a game. Let's use Splatoon as an example, right? Like it's all about painting and, painting the ground to try to win the game. Once you have that, building the game around it is actually a very solved problem. It's like, it needs menus, it needs levels, it needs boss battle. Like this has all been done before.
What are some of your some of the big titles that have influenced you as a designer over the years?
So the top three I always go back to from like a kid was like Super Metroid, Chrono Trigger, and Smash Brothers. Those are the big three. And then once I sort of hit college, it became like StarCraft for a little while. World of Warcraft, I was a raid leader for a long time, played that like 7-8 years. Transitioned into League. Diablo 3 I still play every once in a while. Just recently did a hardcore character to Paragon 200. And then the other fun thing I did was when I first got to Riot, I wasn't quite as busy. So I needed a way to kind of like force myself to play some new games and learn. I actually did a YouTube channel for a short while called like First 30 of Gaming, where I would play a game for 30 minutes and then just judge its design based solely on 30 minutes. 30? And there are some really good games that have some really terrible first 30s where it's like you're watching cutscenes and moving for 30 minutes.
Yeah. You worked on the new tutorial, right?
I did. I worked on the new tutorial.
Was there any alignment there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I assume that, it would be interesting to sort of see how other games
do. One of the things I've learned throughout many different things, Nintendo playing games, is like players' first impression of a game dictates so much. And it's like you could play a game for an hour and then like, that's it, you're done. And so coming out with a really strong sort of like first impression is really important so that they'll keep playing the game. This is where you see stats like 10% of players actually beat a game. And so, I took sort of that knowledge when designing the new player experience and worked with the team and was sort of like, okay, well, what do we want to show? We want to show what's really fun about League of Legends in like 5 minutes. What's fun about League of Legends? Using champions and team fighting. And so like that's what we focused on. And so in the new tutorial, you can actually like take portals and switch between various champions, and you end up in a 5v5 team fight like 3 minutes in. Yeah. And like that's really important to show.
What are moments where you feel like you've had a great deal of success here? Like like I did this, it worked. Like what are those types of moments look like for you?
Pretty much whenever you launch a product and it goes well and you keep using it is sort of the big one. Like at Nintendo, it's shipping products, but specifically at Riot, like the mission system was one I'm really proud of because there was a lot of push to like make it more complicated and have more bells and whistles. And it's like, no, keep it simple. Players want to just like do a mission, get some stuff, but then go back to playing the game, the core essence of the game. And upon shipping it, that has proven to be correct, which is sort of a gratifying, like, I know what I'm talking about, which is kind of nice.
How do you know when something has been success? Like you release that stuff, you want to find out if it's good or bad or if the players like it or not. Is that mostly from like Twitter and Reddit? Is it like a data thing where you have like a data guy come in and say like, look, a bunch of people are using this. Like how do you figure out if like you've succeeded?
So that's an interesting question because I would say a lot of Riot is very much like those two things like you described. It's either you go look at like Reddit boards, Twitter, whatever, or you do some data insights, you send out some survey. For me, it's much less about that, and it's more like at Nintendo you sort of learn to like play like a player, but really what I mean by that is like you're not the player. Most people who are game developers are what you'd call like top 95 percentile. They play tons of games, they think about it all the time. Most normal players are like, I do this in my spare time or play a few games a week. And so whenever we launch a product, I try to go and play that product as a player. And like with missions, I've tried to make sure I do every mission just to make sure they work. And so I go back and like, did that work? Did that feel good? Yeah, it did. And that's sort of a muscle you have to develop over time to sort of turn off what you want as a player and more broadly what players will want.
Yeah. It must be hard because you are, like you said, you are so different from the majority of the player base in so many ways, right? Like you are thinking about this stuff, you've thought about past iterations of it, you have all this context for why you arrive at something, whereas like when a feature drops, it's just suddenly a player who might not have been playing League for the past 2 months because they've been busy at work, they come in, log in, and they're like, what is all this crap? You know?
What was really good for flexing that muscle was at Nintendo, we called it the 35-year-old mom test. And what we would do is we would be developing a product and we would bring in some, person who normally didn't game that much and have them play the game. And it was very revealing the problems they faced versus like someone who understands all the conventions of games, the problems they would face. Because even with like the new tutorial, for example, when we first started developing that, a lot of the people on the team were like, players aren't going to struggle with this stuff. They get it. It's easy. we brought in some like 13 to 15-year-old kids who like don't PC game, and it was amazing watching like getting them to just right click. You know, WASD was pretty much the default, and so many accidental heals and flashes. Getting them to use abilities was actually a really big struggle. We struggled for a while, like, how do we call out, like, press Q, this is a thing? You know, like, those are different problems that, you know, when you see suggestions for the tutorial, people are like, oh, teach me how to auto-cancel, and you're like, no.
Yeah, because and that's also another point, because when you go to like a Twitter or Reddit, the people that are providing that feedback are also really hardcore fans,
Absolutely.
right? Like a new player experience is like the opposite of what any of those people are going to be exposed to.
Yeah, and that's a real problem, right? Because then you get that feedback where it's like, give me all these tutorials that show me proper jungle paths, and like, you get where they're coming from and you get that player need, but that's just not the goal of what you're trying to accomplish. With the new player, we're trying to really get real new players to like League of Legends.
Actually, it's funny thinking about it, you know, and I tend to do esports interviews. Like, a lot of the stuff you work on probably is disregarded by a lot of the esports players, right? Double Lift probably doesn't care so much about like a Bilgewater event or like,
correct. And it's one of those things that like you have to remind yourself that like just because it's not getting all the attention doesn't mean it's not important. I will say one of the cooler moments was when Afromu tweeted out that he reached level 100. And this was only like a month and a half after it launched, because obviously he plays a little more than I do.
Right.
But that was cool that like Afromu cared, and it was like, that's neat.
Yeah.
Felt really good.
You have any advice for people who want to get into game design?
Yeah, play a lot of games is the one you'll hear the most often. But the thing I'll add to that is don't just play the games. Really try to understand how they work and why they work the way they do. Oftentimes you get a lot of people who will focus on just like, oh, here's why it's fun, here's why it's not. But really get into the weeds of like, why did they do that exact decision? Or even challenge yourself, if I had to make it better, what would I do? I know as a kid growing up, I would often read like the strategy guides for games, like Super Nintendo games and 64 games. But just reading all that stuff and like looking at the map layouts and things, you really get a sense of like the patterns of like, oh, they always put the power-ups in these hidden ways, and you start to notice the patterns of game development that will help you moving forward.
Yeah. And then finally, anything that you feel people who are interested in Riot, fans of Riot, or interested even on the design side of Riot should know or would be interested in knowing?
I mean, the big thing that I'll tell people that has made me really happy with Riot, and I would advise anyone who wants to come here to think through, is sort of like, Riot is the kind of company that will give you what you're willing to put into it. And so if you come here with your A game, ready to do awesome stuff, and ready to put the work in to do that awesome stuff, you'll get to do it, and you'll have great satisfaction, and you'll get to ship a lot of stuff. If you come here sort of expecting an easy ride, then you won't really have a lot of successes. So if you're considering coming here, like, definitely come here ready to do awesome things and be really passionate about it.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Steve.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.